They said he was using me. That a girl like me, the daughter of an investment executive, shouldn't be dating a guy who runs a secondhand bookstore. I thought it was just overprotective parenting, until my dad slid a $10,000 check across the table and said, "Disappear from my daughter's life." When they couldn't buy my love, they tried to destroy it. But a year later, the man they called a nobody stood beside me under a sign that read, "Owner, Eva and James." I met James on a rainy April afternoon when Boston felt like it was drowning in gray. The city was slick with mist, puddles glinting under streetlights, and the air smelled like cold metal and wet pavement. I had just wrapped up a long client meeting that went nowhere, exhausted, emotionally drained, and waiting for an Uber that canceled mid-ride. I ducked into this tiny old bookstore off Beacon Street, the kind of place you walk past 100 times but never notice until you need it. The sign outside was hand-painted, slightly crooked, the window fogged with rain. Inside, it smelled like paper, cedar shelves, and a faint trace of coffee. Old jazz played softly from a corner speaker, and the world outside just stopped. That's where I saw him. James. He was behind the counter, glasses slipping down his nose, sleeves rolled to the elbow, sorting a stack of battered hardcovers. He looked up, met my eyes, and smiled. Calm, warm, a little shy, but grounded in that rare, effortless confidence of someone who doesn't need to prove anything. "Looking for something in particular?" he asked. "Just shelter," I said, shaking rain off my coat. "From life, mostly," he chuckled. "Plenty of that here." I picked up a copy of The Catcher in the Rye, maybe out of reflex, maybe curiosity. He glanced at it and said, "That's the one I always go back to. Every time life feels too loud." I smiled. "Still searching for yourself?" He shrugged. "Aren't we all?" He lent me his umbrella when I left. I said I'd bring it back. And somehow returning that umbrella turned into coffee. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into weekends spent exploring bookstores, thrift shops, and old diners that smelled like syrup and nostalgia. James wasn't flashy. He didn't brag. He didn't need to. He had this quiet steadiness, the kind that made chaos feel like background noise. I used to think love had to be fireworks. With him, it was more like gravity, gentle, inevitable, constant. When I finally told my parents about him, I thought they'd be happy. My mom always said she wanted me to find someone kind. My dad said he just wanted someone who treated me right. But that Sunday dinner turned out to be the first test, the invisible, kind that only parents with too much money and not enough empathy know how to give. Mom was the first to strike, smiling behind her Chardonnay glass. "Where did you say he works again, darling?" "At a bookstore in Beacon Hill," I said. "He manages it." She tilted her head. How quaint. That word, quaint, hit harder than it should have. It wasn't praise. It was judgment disguised as politeness. Dad followed. And his parents? His mom's a nurse. Single parent. The silence that followed could have cut glass. Over the next few weeks, every dinner with them felt like a negotiation. They called it just checking in. I called it what it was, control wrapped in concern. Mom started asking questions like, "Does he plan to move up? I asked. Do something more sustainable? "Mom, it's a bookstore, not a startup." She smiled. That's exactly my point. Then came the accidents. Twice she spilled red wine on his shirt, once at home, once at a restaurant. Both times she dabbed at it with a napkin and said, "Oh dear, some stains never come out." James laughed it off. I didn't. I could see what she was doing, testing his pride, his patience, and mine. When subtle cruelty didn't work, she moved to sabotage. She started sending me links to articles like, "Why Relationships in Your 20s Rarely Last." "Just for fun," she said, smiling. Until one night I borrowed her iPad and found 3 dating profiles, with my name, my photos, my bio, except it wasn't me. The bios read, ambitious, financially driven, looking for a partner who values success. That's not who I was. It was who she wanted me to be. When I confronted her, she didn't even flinch. "I was just keeping your options open." "By catfishing your own daughter?" "You'll understand when you're older," she said, in that patronizing tone she reserved for people she thought were beneath her, including, apparently, her own child. That was the night I realized something painful. They didn't just dislike James. They didn't trust me. They didn't believe I could choose right. Because right, to them, always meant rich. When I came home that night, I didn't tell James what happened. He just handed me a mug of tea, sat beside me, and said softly, "You don't have to talk about it. Just promise me you'll keep choosing what makes you happy." He didn't know it. But that sentence, that gentle faith, meant more to me than every luxury my parents ever bought. Still, I could feel it in his silence later that night. The fear that one day, I'd stop choosing him, and if I'm honest, part of me feared that too. I thought things might settle down after that night, after my confrontation with my mother and the silent tension that followed. But in families like mine, silence doesn't mean peace. It means strategy. They weren't done. They were regrouping. At first, my mom switched tactics from judgment to concern. Her text started reading like emotional spreadsheets, polite, methodical, each question hiding a calculation behind it. Is James working full-time now? Do you two have a financial plan if this gets serious? Sweetheart, have you considered that he might feel intimidated by your background? Every message came wrapped in sugar. But underneath, there was always that bitter core, the same assumption: you can't build a future with someone like him. My dad didn't text. He didn't need to. His disapproval had always been quieter, colder, like an air conditioner humming in the background. You stop hearing it, but you still feel the chill. Every Sunday dinner turned into an evaluation disguised as small talk. He'd sip his scotch, eyes fixed on me like a quarterly report. "So what are your 5-year goals, Eva?" he'd ask. Then casually, "And what about James? Does he have a long-term vision? Or is he just coasting?" I remember snapping once. "He's not coasting. He's building something?" Dad smiled faintly, the kind of smile executives use when they've already decided the deal won't close. "We'll see," he said. After that, dinners became optional. Then they became unbearable. James started sensing the shift in me, the way I'd tense whenever my phone buzzed, the way I avoided talking about my family. He never asked for details, but I could tell he knew enough. Then came the dinner. The one that changed everything. My father called and said he wanted to get to know James better. He said it like an invitation. But I knew my father well enough to recognize a setup when I heard one. The table was set like a boardroom. Crystal glasses, linen napkins, even the good silver we only used for investors and holidays. James showed up in his best shirt, the one with slightly frayed cuffs. He brought my mother flowers. She thanked him but didn't smell them. At first, the conversation was civil. Too civil. They asked about the bookstore, about his plans. Then my dad leaned back, twirling his wine glass, and said, "Books are a tough business in the age of Amazon." James smiled politely. "Not everything has to compete with Amazon, sir." My mom chuckled. "That's an optimistic view." It wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an interview, one he was never meant to pass. I could see him trying to stay calm, respectful, collected. But by dessert, the tension was thick enough to taste. When we finally left, he didn't say much. His jaw was tight. His eyes distant. For 3 days after that, he was quiet. Not cold, just heavy. I assumed it was exhaustion, or maybe embarrassment. Until one night when I found him sitting on the couch, staring at the floor. "Eva," he said, voice low. "Your dad called me." My stomach dropped. "What did he want?" He hesitated. "He offered me money." I blinked. "Money? For what?" He met my eyes. $10,000. To walk away from you. For a second, the world just froze. I laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "You're kidding." He didn't laugh. He just shook his head slowly. He actually pulled out a check. Had it already signed? Said it was a gesture of goodwill. Then he told me he'd double it if I needed time to think. I couldn't breathe. My father, the man who raised me to believe that integrity mattered more than profit, had just tried to buy my boyfriend's disappearance. "What did you do?" I asked. "I told him to keep his money," James said quietly. Then I walked out. He didn't look angry. Just hurt, the kind of hurt that doesn't make noise. And that made it worse. That night, I called my father. "Did you really offer him $10,000? I asked. He didn't sound guilty. He sounded tired of pretending to be the good guy. "I wouldn't call it an offer. More like a test," he said. A test? I needed to know if he was the real deal. You call that a test? I call it humiliation, he exhaled. I call it parenting. That was the moment something in me snapped, not loudly, but completely. I hung up before I said something that would burn everything to the ground. The next day, my mom showed up at my apartment with a basket of organic fruit and that soft voice she used whenever she wanted to manipulate me through nostalgia. Your father went too far, she said, placing the basket on the counter. But you have to understand, he's just trying to protect you. By insulting the man I love? I said, she sighed. You'll understand when you have a daughter. I pulled my hand away. If I ever have a daughter, I'll teach her that love isn't a transaction. She flinched. For once, I had said something she didn't have a script for. That was the day I realized something that hurt more than the bribe. The family I grew up with and the life I wanted to build. They couldn't coexist. I would have to choose. That night, James and I sat on the floor of his tiny studio apartment. He was quiet. I was numb. The rain tapped the window like a metronome. He finally said, I don't want to come between you and your family. I looked at him, eyes burning. You're not between us, James. You're the only one who's with me. He didn't respond, just pulled me close until I stopped shaking. And for the first time I realized, love isn't always about fireworks. Sometimes it's just two people holding each other while the world outside tries to buy them apart. That night after my mother left, I sat on the couch for hours, staring at the fruit basket she'd brought, each apple polished to perfection. Like a metaphor for the way she packaged control as care. I thought about how everything in my life up until that point had been curated by them. My school, my friends, my internships, even the coffee shops I was encouraged to frequent. And for the first time, I realized I'd never actually chosen anything freely. Not until James. So the next evening, I drove to my parents' house. It was late, close to 10:30, but I didn't care. The house glowed like a museum exhibit. Perfect, silent, expensive. I knocked until my knuckles hurt. When my father opened the door, his expression was calm. Too calm. Come in, he said. We need to talk. My mother was sitting in her usual spot. That beige armchair she called her reading chair, even though I'd never once seen her read in it. She held a cup of tea like always. She didn't look surprised. They must have been expecting me. I know about the check, I said. Dad didn't flinch. Good. Saves me the trouble of explaining. You think that was right? I think it was necessary. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because disbelief was the only way to keep from screaming. Necessary? To offer a man money to walk out on your daughter? He leaned forward. To protect my daughter from wasting her potential. That word, potential, was his religion. He'd worshipped it more than love, more than decency, maybe even more than me. Dad, I'm not your investment, I said. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. That's not what this is. Yes, it is. Every time you don't understand something, you try to buy it or fix it. But this isn't one of your companies, and I'm not your quarterly loss. Mom placed her teacup down with a soft clink. Sweetheart, she said, her tone like silk wrapping around barbed wire. Love doesn't pay the bills. I met her eyes. I'm not asking it to. I just want you to stop treating it like a debt. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then my father said quietly but clearly, if you stay with him, we'll cut you off completely. Tuition, health insurance, everything. I froze. You're blackmailing me? He sighed as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. I'm teaching you consequences. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter, at least the version they could control. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice wasn't. Then consider this my first lesson in independence, I said. And I walked out. The next few weeks were chaos. My tuition payment bounced. My phone plan got cut. One by one, every lifeline they'd created for me vanished. It was like watching my old life evaporate in real time, each privilege dissolving, leaving me raw and exposed. My mother sent text after text, emotional monologues disguised as apologies. You don't understand how hard this is for your father. Please just come home. We'll talk it through. Why are you doing this to us? My father sent one email. You'll thank me when this falls apart. I blocked them both. For the first time in my life, the silence was mine. James and I moved into his tiny studio apartment in Cambridge. Calling it small would be generous. One bed, one desk, one stove that only half worked. The walls were thin enough that we could hear our neighbor's TV through the drywall. But it was ours. And for a while, that was enough. I took on freelance marketing gigs, small clients, unpaid trials, anything I could get. I'd stay up until 3 a.m., writing social media copy for brands I didn't care about, drinking lukewarm coffee, promising myself it was temporary. James picked up extra shifts at the bookstore and started managing inventory for other small shops in the area. He'd come home exhausted, hands smelling of old paper and ink. We were barely surviving, but we were free. There were nights we ate ramen on the floor, laughing at how broke we were. There were nights I cried quietly while he slept, terrified that my parents might be right, that love couldn't feed us, that integrity couldn't pay rent. But then he'd stir, half asleep, reach for my hand, and everything inside me would quiet again. One night, when the weight of it all finally caught up to me, I broke down completely. It was 2 a.m. The rain was hitting the window like it had the day we met. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, whispering, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm being stupid. James sat beside me, pulled me close, and said, Eva, they can take your money, but they can't take your worth. It was such a simple sentence. But it was the first time I truly believed it. The months that followed were both brutal and beautiful. We learned to live on less. We learned how to fix things instead of replacing them. We learned that peace doesn't come from comfort. It comes from choice. And even though my parents had meant to break us, what they really did was burn every bridge that led back to the version of myself who needed their approval. By the 3rd month, I got approved for emergency financial aid from the university. It wasn't much, but it kept me enrolled. I sent the paperwork myself, signed every form, paid every dollar. No one swooped in to save me, and for the first time, I didn't want them to. Every morning, I'd walk to class past the bookstore, where James was rearranging shelves or sweeping the front steps. He'd wave, I'd smile, and it would hit me again, how everything I'd lost was the price of everything I'd gained. One evening, as we sat by the window eating takeout Chinese from paper boxes, he asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I looked at him, hair messy, sleeves rolled, smile tired but soft. "Every day," I said. "But never enough to undo it," he nodded. "Good, because I'd do it all again, even if it meant starting over with nothing." I reached across the table, squeezed his hand, and for a fleeting moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not because life was perfect, but because for once, it was mine. 6 months later, I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was rebuilding. Boston's winter was biting that year, the kind that turned your breath to smoke and your fingers to ice. But for once, I didn't dread the cold. It felt honest, cleansing. I'd traded comfort for clarity, and that trade had reshaped everything about me. My days were packed, classes, freelance work, and hours helping at the bookstore. I'd become the girl who carried both a laptop and a box cutter, writing copy in the back room between unpacking shipments. I wasn't the kind of success my parents respected, but I'd started to respect myself. James and I decided to invest what little we had into the store. It was an old, neglected place with peeling paint and a leaky skylight, but it had bones, history. We stayed up late repainting walls, reshelving books, and scrubbing stains left by decades of forgotten readers. Every night we'd collapse on the wooden floor, exhausted, covered in paint, eating instant noodles from one bowl. And every night I'd think, we're building something they can't measure. We renamed it Harbor and Hearth. It felt right, a place for wanderers to rest, for stories to belong. And maybe, in some quiet way, it was also for me. A harbor for the version of myself I'd almost lost. One morning, a local journalist walked in, notebook in hand. He said he was doing a piece on small businesses surviving in the digital age. We laughed, thinking it was just a blurb buried on page 12. 2 weeks later, there we were, on the front page of the Boston Local, Young Couple Revives Historic Bookstore. Love, literature, and resilience in Beacon Hill. The photo showed us standing in front of the freshly painted door, our names faintly visible on the sign behind us. I didn't realize it at the time, but that article would reach exactly the people I least expected, and ironically, the people I'd stopped trying to impress. A week after it ran, my mom called. Her voice was bright. Too bright. The way people sound when they're performing normalcy. "Eva, your father and I saw the article. We're so happy for you," she said. I could hear my dad in the background murmuring something about entrepreneurial spirit. Then she added, "Can we meet for coffee? Just to catch up?" I almost said no, but curiosity, or maybe closure, got the better of me. We met at a cafe near Copley Square, the kind my mother always liked. Quiet, expensive, faintly pretentious. They were both dressed like it was a board meeting. Dad in his tailored navy suit, Mom in pearls and perfume that smelled like money and memories. I came straight from the shop, still in jeans, with paint on my hands and a coffee stain on my sleeve. When I sat down, Mom reached across the table and touched my wrist. "Eva, you look happy," she said, like it surprised her. "I am," I said simply. Dad cleared his throat. "We may have been a little hard on you, but we're proud of what you've done." He pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "A graduation gift," he said. $5,000. No strings attached. I looked at it. I didn't even touch it. "What's the condition?" I asked. "No condition," he said too quickly. "We just want you to think about your future. You know, stability, growth. Maybe open something bigger someday." He said bigger, like small was a failure. I pushed the envelope back toward him. "Thank you," I said quietly. "But my future's already started, and it doesn't need your funding." Mom's smile faltered. Dad's jaw tightened. "You're choosing him over us?" he asked, the same old question, the same old blindness. "No," I said. "I'm choosing me." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Mom blinked back tears, whispering, "We only wanted what's best for you." I nodded. "I know. But what's best for me doesn't look like what's best for you." When I stood to leave, my father didn't stop me. Maybe for the first time, he understood that I wasn't coming back. Not in anger, but in peace. A year later, on a golden spring morning, James and I bought the bookstore outright. I remember the sound of the new wooden sign going up, a clean, sharp knock of hammer against nail. The smell of fresh varnish. The way the sunlight hit the glass just right, reflecting two faces that had earned every scar and smile. When it was done, James stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. He grinned. "What do you think?" The sign read, "Owner, Eva and James." I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, watching it sway gently in the breeze, the letters catching the morning light like quiet defiance. Then I took a photo and posted it online with the caption, "They once said he wasn't good enough. Now we own the place where it all began." The post went viral in our small circle. Friends shared it. Former coworkers commented congratulations. Even strangers wrote things like, "That's poetic justice." But the comment that mattered most came later that evening, not online, but through a FaceTime call. My dad was on the screen, his face smaller, older. Behind him, I could see their perfectly staged living room, still spotless, still cold. He said, "Is that really your store?" I turned my phone around, showing him the sign. "Owner Eva and James," I said softly. He stared at it for a long time, then said, "You really did it." "I did," I said. He looked away, swallowing hard. "Maybe I was wrong," I smiled faintly. "It's okay, Dad. Your mistake made me who I am." And then, for once, there was no argument. Just silence, the kind that means understanding or maybe surrender. When the call ended, I stood outside for a long time, the cool evening air wrapping around me. Through the window, I could see James inside, rearranging books, humming under his breath. The shop was warm, golden, alive. For years, I had confused love with approval, family with obligation, and success with validation. But standing there that night, watching the man I loved build something out of nothing, I finally understood. Some people fight their parents' expectations by shouting. I fought mine by living differently. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. I smiled. Not the smile of someone who'd won, but of someone who finally stopped needing to.